When I think about Spider-Man and what he represents as a character, I consider his integrity, his morality, his kind heart, as well as his powers and how perfectly they represent the core of his character. Webs, wall crawling, agility, strength, and sunglasses that can call a drone strike against a high school kid who's trying to hook up with your girl.
Yeah, he's a target.
Copy that. Target is Brad Davis. Initiating strike.
Classic Spider-Man.
Alright people, let's do this one last time.
Into the Spider-Verse released to universal acclaim, with everyone from old school comics fans to entire families and beyond, enraptured by the game-changing, groundbreaking animation style, the brilliant script, the pacing that utilizes every frame, and every beautifully rendered movement to tell a fun, charming, and emotionally moving story. The film surprised everyone, even those looking forward to it. Spider-Man's been a fan-favorite character for decades, and one beloved by general audiences as well, especially in the last 2 decades. But nobody could have predicted the degree to which 2018's Oscar-winning animated masterpiece would reignite our collective enthusiasm for the wall crawler. All the wall crawlers. Not only did the film inject new radioactive blood into the mythos, it also tapped into the core element of what makes Spider-People, whether Peter, Miles, Noir, Gwen, or Ham, so specifically marvelous when compared to most other superheroes, most other fictional characters of any genre, in this humble channel's view. There's this one transcendent moment late in Into the Spider-Verse that encapsulates what it means to be Spider-Man, and why so many of us connect with the character on such a deep and profound level. The amazing music, the spectacular voice acting, the superior animation style, the clever, tightly scripted web of a plot. Every single element of craft and creativity on display in the movie converge together and pay off in this perfect cinematic moment. This one scene, a scant few seconds of runtime that causes the mind to hum like you've been zapped by electro, no matter how many times you've seen it. The adrenaline spikes and time slows down, making a few seconds feel like a lifetime, in the good way. The hairs stand up on the arm, maybe you get chills or pound the couch like, hells yeah, my dude? Or maybe you just silently and stoically appreciate the moment. No matter what your outward response is, inside, you're experiencing the purest distillation of what it means to be Spider-Man. That scene?
You on your way.
When do I know I'm Spider-Man?
You won't. That's all it is, Miles. A leap of faith.
Like, what's up, danger? Like, what's up, danger?
But why, as the kids say, does that moment just hit different? In this video, with my friend from the channel Questing Refuge joining me, we explore why that scene slaps so hard, and reveal what we believe to be the core element of Spider-Man. But before we swing any further, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Did you know you have great power over whether this video is seen by more people? It's true, so it's your responsibility to do the right thing. If you enjoy the content we do, Venom blast that like button, leave your best quips in the comments, or share it with a like-minded friend. Thanks, you're my hero. Now on with the show! Today we'll focus on the 2 most well-known Spiders-Men, Miles Morales and Peter Parker. And yes, that's how it's said. Spiders-Men. It's like attorneys general. So how do these arachno dudes' powers represent symptoms of trauma and anxiety? And how do the characters' respective story arcs, in both comics and film, act as an anxious person's power fantasy? Let's some context. Trauma is a well-known yet often misunderstood phenomenon in the human experience. Common usage typically refers to some kind of physical trauma, like wounds from a car crash. However, trauma is also an unseen psychological effect. It's very likely that you, watching this now, have been traumatized in one way or another to a small or large degree. Psychological trauma can be caused by any event or series of events that create long-term negative effects on someone's well-being. This could be from a singular stressful event like surviving a battle in a war, or it could be caused by prolonged exposure to things like child abuse, poverty, or bullying. Veterans are traumatized when they come home from violent conflict. Children are traumatized when they're abused or neglected. Minorities and vulnerable populations are traumatized by all manner of unjust systems. Everybody is traumatized when their governments fail to protect them from a deadly pandemic. One of the most common forms of trauma is the loss of a loved one, like when Peter Parker held his Uncle Ben as he died from a gunshot. Or when Peter Parker held his Uncle Ben as he died from a gunshot. Or when Miles Morales saw Spider-Man killed. Or when Miles Morales saw his Uncle Aaron killed. Ignoring for a moment that those last few examples are fictional, these traumatic experiences are all valid and are likely to create severe ongoing distress in the traumatized person. No trauma is any more or less worthy of consideration than others. Trauma isn't measured against other trauma. It's treated on a contextual basis, case by case, and there's no merit to weighing traumas or assigning value to any cause of trauma. There's no metric for human suffering. The key thing that all traumas do have in common is that they disrupt a person's perception of reality. This can be absolutely devastating to our psychology, which in turn can have severe and lasting consequences throughout our daily lives. The ways that we previously understood life, the world, it's drastically and jarringly shaken, often shattered beyond recognition. Our feeling of security and safety is annihilated. Even if the physical wounds heal, or there were no visible injury at all,
Poppy, is that you?
it can take years for someone to heal and learn to live with the effects of psychological trauma. As always, there are links in the description for mental health, trauma, and mutual aid resources. And starting with this video, I'm adding autism resources too. Symptoms of psychological trauma vary, but generally consist of anger, sudden mood swings, difficulty concentrating, withdrawing from friends and family, feeling sad and hopeless, or just feeling disconnected and numb to the world. The most common symptom of post-traumatic stress, it can be argued, is anxiety. Anxiety, however, is not limited to victims of a trauma. Lots of people live with anxiety, from social anxiety to performance anxiety and many shades between.
What's up, danger?
Peter Parker and Miles Morales are defined by their trauma and anxieties. Sure, they both hide it well, and they remain outwardly stable. But inside, these superheroes are a mess of anxieties and fears, all stemming from their respective traumatic experiences. But to look at how perfectly Spider-Man represents trauma and anxiety, we need to look at the original, and his specific spidery skill set. I'm talking about the OG, PDP, the
Amazing.
Alpha Arachnid, aka Spider Daddy. Peter Parker carries the burden of his uncle's death, but it's compounded by the fact that Peter can never forgive himself for not stopping the thief who ended up murdering Uncle Ben.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
5 minutes later.
Over here, Uncle Ben.
This type of trauma is called survivor guilt. Survivor guilt, or survivor disorder, occurs when someone near a tragic incident feels responsible for the tragedy despite it not being their fault. Peter didn't kill Uncle Ben, yet he carries the weight of self-incrimination, an eternal wound in his young mind that whispers to Peter, "It's your fault." Uncle Ben, as we all know, had told Peter,
When you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
If you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things.
With great power comes great responsibility.
when Pete realized that the same thief he didn't stop ended up murdering Uncle Ben moments later, it created an immense and life-altering trauma that needed resolution. Spider-Man is that resolution. This is Peter Parker's internal motivation, his defining and eternal wound. Spider-Man, on a psychological level, is the superhero embodiment of Peter Parker working through his survivor guilt, his trauma. Looking at Spidey's powers, virtually every single one can be seen as an expression of his psychological injuries. None of his abilities are inherently of an offensive nature.
Spider-Man, a psychopath!
No, despite J. Jonah Jameson's notions of the so-called menace, the Webhead's abilities are about survival, protection, defense, and escape. Fight-or-flight responses that any anxious or traumatized person would love to have. There's also the third response, freeze. We'll get to that in a few moments with Miles and his awesome bonus powers. For now though, what better place to start than arguably the most iconic Spider ability? Swinging through the sky, suspended by nearly unbreakable webs.
Go web!
Okay, so this one power is really a piece of tech that Spidey wears on his wrists that fire a high tensile web substance, unless we're talking the Raimi version. Ugh. I know it's an allegory for puberty, but we really didn't need organic web shooters. Maybe you disagree? Let me know in the comments. Even still, who hasn't dreamt of having something that feels akin to flight? That enviable ability to move or escape freely is especially important if you have a heightened sense of danger from a past trauma. To be in a situation that's caused us great harm in the past, whether physically or emotionally, can send our body into overdrive. Our trauma responses kick in, trying to prepare us for danger. The most efficient way that our body knows how to do that is to trigger our flight response so we can get the hell out of Dodge. Or just to get the hell out of the way when your best friend's dad flies towards you in his goblin costume trying to murder you. Can you imagine a better way to do that than being able to literally pull yourself out of a bad situation? Up and away with a sense of control, of freedom and security? Usually, when we think of spiders and their webs, we think of their intricate traps, sinisterly used to capture innocent, oblivious prey. Spider-Man is very unlike a spider in that regard, as he usually chooses to forego devious planning, his webs used more spontaneously on an as-needed basis. Effectively, this gives Spider-Man a way of responding to a situation and exerting control when he's unable to just get away. And control can become really important for those of us with trauma, particularly when it comes to managing our triggers. We're more likely to have a reactive response when trying to protect ourselves. The ARACHNID, as Marvel tried to make us call him in the 90s, has no such concerns, unless he runs out of web fluid. The rest of Spider-Man's powers are all about keeping him safe as well. While super agility, durability, and clinging to surfaces are all things that certainly improve his ability to fight, they're primarily used as defenses, either to help him traverse the city to rescue people, get away from trigger-happy cops, stay hidden, or dodge incoming threats. As mentioned before, these powers are expressions of the most basic, primal human reactions to danger, fight or flight. He can use his webs, speed, agility, and strength to save people, escape, dodge, all acts of flight, or if necessary, Spidey can use his webs, speed, agility, and strength to restrain or beat the crap out of the Rhino. These are obviously more of the fight response. Even Spider-Man's super strength, which might seem like a more straightforward ability for offense and violence, is often played as a means to save people, or himself.
Come on, Spider-Man. Come on, Spider-Man.
One of the most iconic Spider-Man moments in both comics and film is using that enhanced strength to prevent his own end by literally lifting a building's worth of rubble. That scene in Homecoming is directly inspired by this panel from an early Spidey comic book, Amazing Spider-Man number 33. Within both versions, Peter must dig down and find strength he didn't know he had, or he'll die. Not just physical strength either. Just as crucial to this moment is Peter accepting that he is Spider-Man.
Come on, Spider-Man.
Not just some kid playing superhero. In this moment, he discovers how strong, how
Amazing
he really is. Spider-Man is a symbol.
On my world, it means hope.
No, not that. Spider-Man is a symbol for Peter and Miles, or anyone really, to remind us we are stronger than we think. We are more capable than we know. These notions are absolutely imperative to recovering from trauma and finding a way to live life again after a traumatic event. Then, of course, there's the infamous Peter Tingle,
Please do not start calling it my Peter Tingle.
or Spidey sense for you traditionalists. Oh, that's weird. I can feel my Eddie tingle going off right now. I wonder what it's reacting to.
Hey Eddie, it's Willow from the channel Questing Refuge. Figured I'd drop in and help you out here, since I'm genuinely in love with Into the Spider-Verse and Miles as a character.
Oh, hey Willow of the channel Questing Refuge, which viewers should subscribe to using the link below. Why don't you tell us about Miles and how Spidey Sense plays a huge role?
In Spider-Verse, Miles literally has his reality shattered as he learns what is really behind the strange events in the city, as he is forced to watch his hero Spider-Man die. He must confront an underbelly of the world that most don't pay any attention to. Because life is hard. We are constantly being overwhelmed by any number of things, and people just want to find what joy they can living their lives. So why worry about things we have no power to change? Miles has that luxury to look away taken from him with his newfound powers. He knows he can do more, but is also well aware it could cost his own life to do so. Miles really only has two options. He can withdraw and submit to his anxiety to protect himself, but to do so, he would have to live with the fact that he isn't doing everything he could, that everyone around him may be unaware but are still very much in danger. This would likely just add to his anxiety because there is no reason to believe anyone else is going to stop it, and having to live a lie pretending you are as clueless as everyone else. Or he can accept that danger will always be there and try to do what's right anyway. This is not easy when you have good evidence to believe you will be hurt or fail. We know which option Miles chooses.
Like, what's up, danger?
Spidey Sense works a lot like our anxiety, right? Spider-Man doesn't know what's wrong. He just knows that something nearby could be harmful. And that's the same for us. Our anxiety makes us alert. It's the mechanism which prepares us to get ready for a threat. The difference between our anxiety and Spidey Sense is that Spidey Sense is a fictional superpower because it's almost never wrong. For us, it's much messier. We might have triggers from past experiences that cause us to think we're in danger when we're not. For example, if you had been in a war, the sound of anything like a gunshot may trigger your anxiety. So you're walking down the road and a car backfires and your body thinks it's back in a war zone. At least so far, Peter's major struggle with trauma in the MCU comes in his second movie, Far From Home. Tony Stark's death has upended how Peter sees himself. Tony gave him the confidence to be the best Spidey he could be. So not only does Peter mourn Tony, he's got to figure out his own path and learn to trust his own judgment, which he finally does in battle with Mysterio, as Peter must rely on his Spidey Sense to dodge illusions thrown at him. And while Spidey Sense may have been used subtly on a few occasions in previous MCU movies, it's dealing with Peter's trauma in Far From Home where it becomes vital.
Come on, Peter Tingle.
And wow, is Mysterio the perfect villain for someone who struggles with an overactive sense of anxiety, especially in a movie that focuses on Peter needing to accept and integrate his trauma as part of his life to gain some sense of control. Mysterio is able to make Peter feel more like any one of us. Mysterio can make Spider-Man doubt his reality and senses.
You can't trick me anymore.
So we can see, or perhaps I should say, sense. Spidey Sense really goes a long way to define Spider-Man. What's at his core that makes him so relatable.
I like it when I sense things that I can't see yet.
I do have a video on my channel that focuses directly on Miles and what I love so much about him, what really makes him stand out from Peter. So hit the link in the description and on screen and go subscribe.
I second that. Fans of this channel will really appreciate your perspective. So, since you're the Miles fanatic, how do his powers convey symptoms of trauma and anxiety?
Miles' powers help round this theme out even more. All of the additional powers Miles has that Peter doesn't work to a similar effect as Spidey Sense, in that they function as automatic defense mechanisms his body can activate to respond to danger. But like with anxiety and other effects of trauma, Miles must learn to understand them better to fully utilize them, and to grow as a person. While Spider-Man's arsenal of powers is full of abilities to assist with fight and flight responses, camouflage gives Miles a power to go with our other most common response to danger, freeze. But unlike the real-world version of freezing in the face of danger, Miles becoming invisible is an active defense. Once again, a power that conveys a very human response to danger, but instead of being simply frozen with fear, Miles has a practical tool to avoid detection. What anxious person wouldn't love this power? Then of course, there's his Venom Strike, Miles' ability to send a paralytic shock through enemies, which at a glance seems like an offensive ability. But the ability to paralyze a foe is more about removing a threat with the least amount of force possible. Not to mention its ability to actually remove restraints from Miles, so should he ever feel trapped, he can blast his way out. Such a potent power, but its use is more about defense and protection than harming a bad guy.
Seems like whether Miles or Peter, what drives the Spider's men is the will to overcome that anxiety and fear of failure that holds them back, to keep trying when it all seems hopeless, especially when it feels hopeless. They swing out into the city every day, despite anxieties and insecurities, in spite of self-doubt, against that all-too-common fear in the back of our minds saying, "You can't do this. You're not up to it. You'll fail." But we don't truly know how great our power is until we've given it everything we've got. There will probably be more trauma in store for the Spider's men and many of us down the road as we work to heal from our wounds, with unknowable dangers around every corner that threaten to hurt us, deceive us, and shatter our reality. Spider-Man accepts these risks. Armed with the tools he's developed after traumatic experiences, he protects people from experiencing the pain he has. Miles and Peter both were forced to face a harsher reality than they knew.
I thought I was the only one.
But they can't look away now, and they don't try to. That's what makes Spider-Man a hero.
The ability, the will to keep trying and keep learning, and to use his experience to benefit others, to heal from our trauma and find ways to help others heal too, to always get back up. We can all be Spider-Man in that way. We just have to decide to swing out into the world and say,
What's up, danger?
Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to make sure you never miss a video. Questing Refuge is going to be working with me on some content going forward, so please go subscribe to them and check out their video on Miles Morales and any of the other deeply insightful, wonderfully edited, and informative videos on their channel. Until next time, peace, love, context. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/actualcontext. I'd like to thank my patrons, Alan Schwarzweller, Daniel Liu, Sean Betton, Alex Jones, Trash Rat, Dracoris Felving, Elizabeth, and Nathan Russell.